We're studying the Gospel of Mark, right? Is that where we're at? We're in a sermon series entitled, what? Simply Following Jesus. Let's begin with acknowledging that certain things are easy to say, difficult to practice. Can we acknowledge that? Easy to say, difficult to practice. Commonly stated, uncommonly practiced. Here are some that come to my mind. I love you with all of my heart. Do you really? All of your heart, like every little bit of it? Well, maybe not. Okay, let's be truthful. I know people say it, but it may not necessarily be accurate. I'm committed to healthy food choices. I saw you at the drive-thru. No, you're not. I know you want to be. How about this one? Till death do us part. They tell us that maybe 50% of people don't really mean that because they say it, but they don't put it into practice. I always drive within the speed limit, Mom. Well, you got home awfully fast, Sonny. Or how about this one? I have total faith in Jesus. Really? Do you really have total faith in Jesus? It's easy to say, difficult to practice. In our minds, those of us that know the Lord would say, in our minds, of course we have total faith in Jesus, but we don't always practice it. And in fact, why don't we just all acknowledge that we all struggle with having all the time faith. That's a real struggle for us, to have faith in the Lord without ever questioning, without ever struggling, without ever doubting. That's pretty difficult to have all the time. But Jesus in the Gospel of Mark calls us to have all the time faith. That means daily faith. That means faith without fail. That means no matter the circumstances, faith. It's easy to have faith when things are great. But Jesus is calling us to have all the time faith. All the time faith. Oh, I think I need some of that in my own life because I must admit I don't always have 100% faith in Jesus. Shameful to say, but it's true. So I need this lesson. I hope that you need this lesson or can at least acknowledge that you need this lesson. And Mark chapter 4 delivers it to us. So we're in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. As we read this, you're probably going to notice there's a lot of minute details. That indicates that the person recording it was probably there in the boat. The details of where Jesus was, where he was sleeping, everything that was taking place indicates that the person that wrote it was probably an eyewitness and felt that it was so important that he would record it under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, put it in our Gospels, pass it off to the Christians that were struggling at Rome, who were probably the early recipients of this book. So this guy had encountered it, he'd felt it, he'd experienced it, and by God's grace, we have this lesson passed on to us as well. Here's how I'm going to handle this text. I want to go through it line by line, statement by statement, and exposit and preach it. And then later on this morning, we'll discuss some points of application from the text, okay? So that's what we're going to do. Let's go to verse 35. We're going to start there. On that day when evening had come, he said to them, context, Jesus is speaking to his disciples. They've been busily involved in ministry. On that day, it's evening time. You know, the preaching services were shutting down. The day was winding up. Here's what Jesus says to them. Let's go across to the other side. Sea of Galilee, kind of round, maybe a little bit more oblong. River comes in from the north. River exits from the south. Almost dead center. So when you spoke of the Sea of Galilee, you would speak of the sides. You're on this side, you go to that side. You wouldn't speak of going into this bay or up to the northern corner. You're on one side or the other. So Jesus is on one side. He wants to go to the other side. In other words, he wants to remove himself rather significantly from ministry. It's the end of the day. He's tired. He's wiped out. When evening comes, the sun goes down. So it's dark out or getting dark. So imagine the scene. We want to understand it, but in order to fully benefit from it, you got to kind of enter into it, feel it. So they're They're tired physically, just wiped out. I mean, ministry is hard work. I've probably done as much physical work as anybody in this room, maybe a little more. And I could work like all day long moving topsoil or putting bricks on a house. And I find preaching way more exhausting than that. Jesus had been ministering to all kinds of people for a long time. He's wiped out. He's fatigued. His disciples are wiped out. It's getting dark. And they get into a boat. And imagine the scene. They go out onto the water. Now, were there lights on the boat? Oh, maybe they had a lantern or something, but they didn't have lights back then like we have lights. In our province, I know, it's required after a certain time of the day for you to have lights in your boat, front and back. And if you don't have them, you'll get fined. If you don't have them, you're going to get yourself into trouble. My dad told me that several years ago when he was bombing across his lake up at the cottage, he had his lights on his boat, and he's tooling along, assuming that everyone else on the lake would also have lights on their boat. At the very last minute, he just sees a row of eyes. And it's a group of 4 or 5 people in a canoe out in a dark lake. From one end of the canoe, just filled right up, paddling along, perpendicular. The back end of the canoe just barely missed. His boat went right through. They could have been killed. So imagine these people being out on the lake. It's dark. They're tired out. I mean, you kind of know something bad's going to happen. You kind of just know it. Well, here we have it. Verse 36. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, which probably means he was already in the boat, which probably means the crowds are so great on the shore that he had to preach from a boat in the water. So he's in the boat. They're like, we got to get out of here. They're leaving the crowds. Do they leave the crowds successfully? No. And other boats were with him. So it's kind of like being at Crystal Bay. Hey, let's bring all our boats and tie them together. She's like, no, I want to get away. Well, we want to go with you. So there's all these boats there. And these aren't particularly big boats, by the way. They would seat about as many people as are in a row here. 10 people. Not a big boat. It's dark. You're tired. The other boats are around them. So it's like, oh, really? They're following me home. They're looking through my windows. They want another sermon? That's kind of the scenario. Now look at verse 37. Here we have it. Here's the problem. And a great windstorm arose. What kind of a windstorm? A great windstorm. We can handle a windstorm, but can we handle a great windstorm? We're tired. It's dark out. We're exhausted. Maybe it's not going to be a big deal. Wrong. And the waves were breaking into the boat. So this wasn't a little bit of, oh, it's rocking. Anybody got any gravel? This is a bigger problem than that. So the boat was already filling. Now, do you think these men were bailing water or just sitting back letting it fill up? Bailing water. They're bailing water. Several of them were fishermen, but the boat's still filling up. So let's say there were 10 guys in the boat. 9 of them are bailing water, but the waves are so high, the water's coming in so fast that the boat is still filling up. So humanly speaking, there's like nothing they can do to rescue themselves. This is a critical scene. They are in dire circumstances. Everything in the natural realm reeks of imminent disaster. What's going to happen? We're all wondering. Well, they had one rather significant advantage at their disposal. Jesus was in the boat. And Jesus is God, and Jesus knows how to work miracles. So you look over to Jesus, he's got a silver wand out, and he's just waving it. The seas are starting to calm, and he's going around patting everybody on the back, reassuring them that there's no problem. Is that what Jesus is doing? Is that what he's doing? What does the Bible say? He was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. Like, really? He's not even awake. It's not like one eye. He's asleep on the cushion. So the cushion would in all likelihood have been a big bag of ballast sand. So you stick it in the stern, it kind of weighs the boat down. Jesus is sleeping on the ballast sand in the back of the boat. And if you've ever ridden a teeter-totter, you understand that if you don't want a lot of movement on a teeter-totter, but you also don't want a lot of fun, you just sit in the middle. Right? Sit in the middle. You're not going to get a lot of movement. But if you want fun, you need to be on the end of the teeter-totter. Well, in a boat, you're in a storm, it's going like this, it's going like this. The place that has the least movement's in the middle. So if the text said Jesus is in the middle of the boat, maybe he's a deep sleeper. No, he's on the end of the teeter-totter. This boat's rocking all different directions, but Jesus is fast asleep in the boat. So the next thing that happens is they woke him and said to him, is there anything wrong with what they've done so far? Is it okay to wake Jesus? Is it okay to speak to Jesus? Well, let's look at Psalm 50, verse 15. There we read, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. So this is an invitation from God. He's like, hey, when you're in trouble, here's what I'm offering. Call upon me. I will deliver you. And what is the mission of God? The glory of God. So God's going to get the glory. We win, he wins. God gets glory, we get rescued. So when his disciples go to him and wake him and speak with him, at this point, having not read any further, everything's fine. We're all squared up with the Bible. This is Psalm 50, verse 15 in practice. No problems at this point. You're allowed to go to Jesus when times are difficult. But notice what they say to Jesus. Teacher, so they knew he was a teacher. It's a term of respect. But then how much more disrespectful can you get than this? Do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not care that we are perishing? Would you say that's more of a question or more of an accusation? It's framed up as a question, but some questions are in fact accusations. And this is an accusation that questions the goodness and the care of God. Who are these guys? Are they the kind of guys that didn't know better? They've been saved for 5 hours. They've never seen Jesus do anything miraculous. They're brand new converts. They're not believers. Okay, you could give those kind of people a pass, a free pass. But that's not who these guys are. Where are we in the Gospel of Mark? We're already at the end of chapter 4. So they have seen Jesus perform miracles, exorcise demons, multiple demons, feed people, resist attack, all kinds of stuff. We're only in chapter 4, but they had seen more than enough care and love and compassion from Jesus. But they say, do you not care? It got me thinking, the things that they had seen up till now were really related to other people. They hadn't had demons cast out of them. They hadn't had Jesus heal them of their paralysis or their diseases. They'd seen it from a few feet away. They're like, wow, Jesus just cast a legion of demons out of that guy. Or Jesus just healed this paralytic of his infirmities. That's pretty cool. But now the storm was their problem. And it's easy to exercise faith and you see Jesus doing something over there or reading about him doing something in someone's life in the Bible. But what about when you're in the boat and the storm is now yours? The problem is yours. And now it's like, well, do I really trust Jesus? Theoretically I do. We're doing a Bible test. Do you trust Jesus? Yes. Okay, we're living in the boat now. Do you trust Jesus? That's the scenario that the disciples experienced. And so here we have an acceptable and an unacceptable reason to wake Jesus up. The acceptable reason would be, Jesus, we have a huge problem and we know you're the only one that can help us. That would have been like, way to go, guys. You scored a 10 out of 10 on that one. You're just practicing Psalm 50. Way to go. But that is not what we see here. We see an unacceptable reason to wake Jesus. They accuse him of not caring. If you think about this, church, what we're dealing with here is the original sin. Go back to Genesis chapter 3. What did the serpent fundamentally accuse God of? Read the narrative. Not being good. First it's questioned. Then it's treated dismissively. Then it's flat out denied. All of them were sinful acts. And if you think about sin as a whole, I would encourage you to run every sin that you've ever heard of or ever considered doing through this statement. Every sin that we commit, lying, theft, adultery, sexual immorality, greed, gossip, slander, you can go up as long a list as you want, is at the end of the day boils down to one thing. It's questioning, it's dismissing or treating trivially, or it's overtly denying the goodness of God. God's holding out on me, so I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not going to obey God. He's a cosmic killjoy. He doesn't have my best interest in mind. He's not good. He's holding out on us. Is that not the whole dialogue, the psychological dialogue of Genesis chapter 3? And whenever we know what's true and we do otherwise, that's exactly what we're doing. God says it's true. We're like, I don't know if he has my best interest in mind or his best interest in mind or anyone else's. I'm just going to do my own thing. At the end of the day, it's all the same thing. It's, do you really care? Are you really good? Are you really loving? It's questioning, it's downplaying, or it's denying the goodness of God. And therefore, it is, in fact, a blasphemous accusation. Well, instead of rebuking them first, Jesus chooses to rebuke the circumstances. Verse 39 reads, "And he awoke, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.'" He makes two declarations, peace and be still. And one for one, there's immediate response. The wind ceased, and there was great calm. Bam, it's done. What does this illustrate? Two commands, two responses, immediate. It illustrates the absolute and total power of Jesus over everything. It blows my mind when I'm talking to people from other quasi-Christian groups or other religions who say, the Bible doesn't declare Jesus to be God. That's like a made-up 3rd century doctrine. Really? Oh, so he can heal paralyzed people with his words. He can cast out demonic hordes from people. And with his mouth, he can instantaneously stop storms, but he's not God. Like, who is he then? Like, really? The absolute power of Jesus, the deity of Jesus, is being demonstrated here, loud and clear. And he rebukes the storm and demonstrates that power. And then he turns to his disciples. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" What word of all those words hits you the hardest? Think about your own spiritual journey. Think about God's faithfulness to you. Think about the times you've doubted. What word jumps off the page at you the most? For me, it's the word still. Have you still no faith? How many times do I have to demonstrate it? You're not new to this. You've seen me in action. You've seen me provide and heal and speak truth and overcome the devil. Have you still no faith? This is not a message for people that have been saved for an hour. This is a message for us that know better. We've seen God at work time and time again. He's proved his faithfulness, but still, after all of that, could it be that we lack faith? They're not rebuked for not liking their circumstances. This isn't a message that says, oh, when you come to Jesus, you're supposed to like everything. Bring on the cancer, love it. Bring on the broken relationships, can't get enough of it. Love economic hardship. Oh, losing my job? Awesome. That's not what this is about. Jesus doesn't call us to like our circumstances, but it is demonstrating that a specific kind of fear, faithless fear, is not acceptable to those that follow the Lord Jesus Christ. He says, still, you have no faith. I mean, by now, Jesus felt that they should have known better and given all of their faith to him and trusted him in the circumstances of the moment, but still, nope. Oh, it was easy for them to be wowed when Jesus was doing it in someone else's life. But now the storm was theirs. It's easy for us to look at other people too, is it not, and say, hey, they should have more faith. Or, wow, look at God working over there. That's increased my faith. But what about when we're in the boat and the storm is ours and we're the only one really feeling it? That's hard. We acknowledge that. Look at their response, verse 41. And they were filled, that's a big word, with great, that's a big word, fear. Now, this is not the same kind of fear that they had just before they woke up Jesus. This is a different kind of fear. They were filled with great fear, and they said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? This is the beginning of a different kind of fear. This is reverential fear. This is awe. This is a holy terror that is set upon them as they saw with wide eyes that Jesus was more than just some new friend, some healer of others, a guy that could fix the guy's problem in the back row. No, Jesus had now done something miraculous for them, and they were filled with awe and with reverence before the Lord. Now Jesus was doing a miracle for them. Look at the statement. Who then is this? How do you read that? What are your thoughts on that? Who then is this? Let me give you two scenarios. Scenario one, who is this guy? Anybody want to guess? Who do you think this guy is? Who do you think he is? Who do you think he is? Who do you think he is? Is this a question of confusion? Or is it the beginnings of a confession of truth? Who is this? Wow. I think it's the beginning of a confession. It's not a full-fledged confession. They don't call him the Son of God yet. They don't call him the Son of Man. They don't acknowledge that he's the King of Kings. They don't acknowledge that he is the God of gods, the Lord of lords. But the who then is this strikes me as a confessional statement in its root form. They didn't fully know enough, or they weren't in a state of mind, or they weren't mature enough to call Jesus by one or all of his names. But this is like something more than out there. They felt it. They had experienced it. Jesus had done something they had seen. It was them that he had healed. And out of that encounter with Christ comes this confession. Who then is this? AKA, there is nobody else like Jesus. We are absolutely convinced of that. I mean, even the sea and the storm obeys him. So do you understand the passage? Are you able to enter into it? Let's consider some application. We'll never be in a boat with Jesus, but this doesn't mean that this episode needs to be relegated to some ancient literary library that we just refer to because we got nothing else to do and we want to find out what Jesus did with his time. Mark, or the writer of Mark, evidently was so impacted by it that under God's direction included it in the scriptures and passed it on to the struggling Christians in Rome. So apparently there's something about this episode that God felt would be useful for people that weren't even in that particular 10-man boat 2,000 years ago on the Sea of Galilee. He wants us then to benefit from this gospel episode. Here are 5 things that I want to share with you that we need to consider. The first one is this: the gospel is not calling us to go numb when we face the storms of life. It's not calling us to do that. That would be contrary to the Psalms. That would be contrary to Jesus' time in the Garden of Gethsemane. That would be contrary to Psalm 50. Be contrary to a lot. The gospel is not calling us to grin and bear it, to pretend it's not happening, to come to church and look like, I didn't have any storms this week. Everything's perfect. That's not what this is about. That would be to misuse the text. But it does call us never to accuse Jesus of not caring for us. Never go there. Lock that down in your mind. Put up a wall. I will never accuse Jesus of not caring for me. I may not understand, but I will never go that far as to accuse Jesus of not being good. He is good. He does love us. I'm not going to think it. I'm not going to say it. I will never accuse Jesus of not caring for us. Secondly, the gospel is not guaranteeing delivery from every storm. We will not be delivered from every storm. We will not. But Jesus will always be present in the storm, even if he appears not to be fixing it. Here's what you need to understand, and what I need to understand. The presence of Christ should be enough. Not just having the problem fixed, but the presence of Christ must become enough for us. I think Jesus was the ultimate role model, was he not? And maybe in his silence, in our suffering, he's role modeling something that he expects of us too. Peace, silence. Kind of a stalwart, I'm not going to let this shake my faith kind of response. See, it's easy to interpret silence as abandonment. But maybe the silence of God at times in our suffering is actually God role modeling for us the very kind of faith and centeredness that God is looking for from us as a manifestation of faith in the storms of life. Have you ever thought about that? Let us never interpret the silence of God as an indication that God has abandoned us. Jesus is always present. Third, we should ask Jesus to deliver us. We should ask him. We mustn't demand it, but we should ask him, not in an accusatory way, but out of our desperation, it's perfectly acceptable to ask for deliverance from Christ. Fourth, Jesus has power over demons, over paralysis, over leprosy, over the sea, over the wind. Who has that kind of power? Ever met anybody? Is there anybody in the history books that has that kind of power? any imam, any priest, any guru, any pastor, any political leader? Does anybody have that kind of power and authority over the world? No, only God does. And so we are forced to conclude, as we read Scripture accurately, that there is no power greater than God. You know it, but I'm not just telling you that because you need to know it again. This is an experiential thing that God is looking for. There is no greater power than God, and if that is a truth that kind of is allowed to absorb into your soul, then all these other things out there, or people out there that want to shake our faith, they start to look like weaklings, actually, like nothing compared to God. But they become bigger than life, larger than life, when I take my eyes off the all-sufficient power of Christ and I start to become afraid of them or it. There is no greater power than God. Number 5, we should always have a healthy fear or awe of Jesus. And therefore, we must never diminish him. Now, hear me this way. We must never diminish him, even when he's been very kind to us. Let's never interpret the kindness, the love, the gentleness of Jesus as passivity, or let's never use it as an opportunity to usurp his authority or to abuse his grace. Can we not all acknowledge as human beings we're kind of a little adverse to authority? Can we all just acknowledge that? We don't do very well with authority. If you have an older sibling, remember when the older sibling was asked to babysit you and you're like, why do they have to babysit me? I don't want their authority over my life. And then we rebelled against our parents and we didn't want our parents' authority. And you may go to work and you're not all that geeked about the authorities at work. You don't like the governing authorities. Like, there's no party that can win. By nature, we don't like pastoral authority. We don't like spiritual authority over us. We don't like authority in marriage. We're all very authority adverse. And it may be because of past issues that have fed into that, but I would just say that more often than not, it's the follower's fault, for the simple reason that there are more followers for every leader. So while there are bad leaders, there's many more followers. And statistically, then, the chances are that it's more likely to be the follower's fault than the leader. We're all authority adverse. And therefore, most church issues, legal matters, marital disputes, parenting issues, whatever they are, we can call them by whatever name, but what they ultimately are is their authority issues. People that want to be in charge that shouldn't be. People that are in charge, wielding too much or too little authority. It's authority issues. We have authority issues. And authority is most likely to be challenged when we see a weakness. Let's use the infamous substitute teacher as our classic analogy. How many of us cannot admit that we abused our substitute teachers? I mean, what are the consequences? They're just here for the day. I mean, we were brats when the substitute teacher would show up. We saw that weakness. They're not going to be back tomorrow. They don't know the principle. They're just here for the day. They don't care. When we see weakness in teachers, parents, politicians, pastors, professors. And when Jesus has been exceptionally gracious to us and merciful to us and loving to us and all that, as he had been to them, it's so easy for us to actually use that against Jesus to kind of diminish his authority. And the way that's expressed is as follows. And maybe you can kind of hear echoes of this in your own mindset when you sin. Well, I'm going to live in sin and I'll just square up with God later on. Have we not all done that? It's not, I just sinned. I never even thought about it. No, it's more likely, oh, there's the opportunity. I know it's wrong. I'm going to do it anyway. While I'm doing it, I know it's wrong, but God is gracious. He'll forgive me down the road. Is that not part of our approach to God so often? I can do what I want because he must forgive me. I can think of blatant opportunities, blatant experiences where I've seen this in my own life or others. Like I'm just going to kind of abuse his grace. Or in our mind, things aren't good. They've been good for a while. Jesus, why don't you do more? Almost like are you not tough enough to deal with this, Jesus? And then we get to the point where we're thinking to ourselves, fine, I'll just do it myself. I'll just call to someone in one of the other boats around me. I'll just bail a little harder, row a little faster. I'll just manage my way through this myself. If Jesus isn't going to help, I might as well take the bull by the horns. And all of these, brothers and sisters, in my life and your life, really are indicators that we've kind of reduced the stature and status of Christ in our own minds and hearts. Sometimes reducing him to a lesser position than we've even granted to ourselves. If you think about it, the gospel itself is an authority issue. It's an invitation by a benevolent king to traitors and rebels to lay down their arms, their own sinful pursuits, and to come and bow the knee before the King of Kings. So it's an authority issue. You may be here today, you haven't trusted in Christ. You're like, well, I haven't had all my questions answered. No, that's not really your problem. It's an authority issue. Well, I haven't seen it role modeled properly. No, that's not the real problem. It's an authority issue. Well, I went to a bad church. They didn't model it well. It's not your problem. It's an authority issue. Jesus calls us to bow the knee every day and acknowledge his kingship. Will you? Let me condense this message into 5 statements. You can write these down. We'll put them up on the screen. And these are 5 things that are in sequence. The first one is this. We will face fearful events. Guaranteed you're going to face fearful events. Oh, I thought when I became a Christian that I'd always be well employed. I'd always clearly know my call. I would never have any problems, no diseases. My spouse would ever be faithful. I'd have a spouse. My kids would be awesome. I'd have kids. I'd always have a little extra cushion in the bank. I thought that's what it was about. That's your notion. You're not in the right place. You're not in the right building. Because that's not biblical Christianity. You will experience fearful events. But Christ wants us to exercise faith in place of fear. And here's how this works. Faith then leads to awe as you see God doing what you can't and what I can't, what no one else can. So you're going to face fearful events. God wants you to exercise faith instead of fear. When you exercise faith, what happens? You're in a place of awe. Awe inevitably and necessarily leads to worship. And what's the greatest calling? To worship God. So when we worship, we are by definition no longer afraid. Well, I worship and I'm still afraid. Then you're not fully worshiping. Well, I worship and I'm still doubting. Then you're not fully worshiping. It's like some half-hearted thing going on. But to see that God, in fact, demonstrates in this sequence of events that he does have his glory in mind, and he does have our good in mind. We will face fear. Christ wants us to replace fear with faith. Faith leads to awe. Awe leads to worship. And when we worship, and the more we worship, the less fear we have. So this is God's call to us, to worship him with reverence, to lift his name high, to keep our eyes locked upon him, to bring this message to mind when your boat is being rocked this week. Jesus is with you. Jesus loves you. Call upon him respectfully, and he will deliver you in his own good timing. And in the process of waiting to be delivered, he wants you to exercise faith so that you're well positioned for the moment, so that your worship increases, and so that your faith is increased and your fear continues to be reduced to the glory of God.